and the Law podcast, the one and only law enforcement podcast that's tackling critical policing and social justice issues and provides insights into the daily realities of policing with your host, Chief Virgil Green.
Kristen, breaking news this morning out of New Hampshire. The search for the suspect in last weekend's deadly mass shooting at Brown University is now over.
Police say the alleged gunman was found dead of an apparent suicide in a rental storage unit. CBS News' Jared Hill has the very latest.
Ending a multi-state murder manhunt. Overnight, authorities closed in on a storage facility in Salem, New Hampshire.
We got him.
The suspected Brown University gunman and suspected killer of an MIT professor found inside a storage unit, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
He was using a phone that was obfuscating ability to track it. He was sophisticated in hiding his tracks.
The alleged shooter, identified as Claudio Manuel Neves Valente, a 48-year-old Portuguese national living in the U.S. legally. Brown says he was a physics PhD student at the university between 2000 and 2003 before he dropped out. School officials say he likely took classes in the same building where he allegedly opened fire last Saturday, killing 2 students and injuring 9 others. Police say he's also believed to have killed MIT professor Nuno Loureiro Monday night. Both were in the same school program back in their native Portugal.
This was always going to be an investigation where something was going to break it open.
The key to breaking the case, according to a police affidavit, was interviewing an anonymous Reddit poster. 3 days ago, the person described seeing the suspect with a gray Nissan Sentra. Investigators tracked the car to a rental company in Boston where the suspect used his real name on the application. Authorities also discovered the suspect's storage unit in Salem, where his body was found.
Our work is not done. There are many questions that need to be answered.
Back in Providence,
there's a sense of relief in the community.
Steps toward healing. Jared Hill, CBS News.
6 of the injured Brown University students are still hospitalized. Police say all 6 are now in stable condition. Overnight, President Trump said he was pausing the visa program through which the suspected shooter entered the United States. Now, funeral arrangements have been made for 19-year-old Ella Cook from Mountain Brook. She was one of the 2 people killed in that shooting this past weekend. That funeral taking place Monday morning, 11 at Cathedral Church of the Advent.
This week.
Hey, welcome to another episode of You and the Law podcast. I'm the host of the show, Chief Virgil Green, and I've got my guest who continues to come on the podcast with his knowledge and wisdom. We've got retired lieutenant from the Providence Police Department, Sean Carroll. Sean, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Chief. For the way you described, I thought there was a third guest, but thank you. You're too kind.
Hey, man, it is always good to be in your company, man. And as we were talking before, when this incident happened, ironically, you retired from the Providence Police Department. Brown University. A lot of the officers who responded to that tragic event, and so what, man, you're going to bring so much knowledge and so much information to the conversation tonight that we're going to be having about what took place. And obviously, the shooter has been, took his own life, but there still remains a lot of questions. And so we're going to be talking about, the safety of university campuses. And Sean, you bring definitely a unique perspective about Brown University, because that's where you're from, and that university and that community. And so I don't think a lot of people realize, including myself, that the Brown University is so embedded in that Providence community. And so just kind of talk me and the listeners through that area, and what was your experience when you were your 20-something years on the department there in Providence with Brown University?
Sure. Well, let me start obviously, because we're talking about this story, let me set the stage for people that are listening that aren't familiar. So from a wide angle perspective, Providence obviously is the capital city of Rhode Island, which is relatively small. The city itself is a decent sized city, has a population of just under 200,000, give or take. Very diverse community. And in this particular area of the city, and we do have, it's 6 or maybe 7 different college campuses within the city. And Brown University is on the east side. And the particular area that it's in is a very well-to-do area. It's an affluent area. And what makes their campus unique for most is that it's not a campus in the traditional sense, meaning there isn't a wall around it with a bunch of buildings.
Yeah.
This is their campus is multiple properties and buildings spread out over, I think it's a couple of miles, all over the east side.
Okay.
So when you hear that type of talk about, being on campus, off campus, this particular location where this incident occurred was literally at the edge of their campus. Like as soon as you cross the street, technically you're off their campus and back into the city of Providence. As far as like jurisdiction concerns, because, another thing that people may or may not know is that they actually have their own police department. Ironically, a large majority of them are retired police officers, and a good portion of those are from Providence. So it really makes a great working relationship between the two agencies because it's, you're working with your friends in many cases. So, which was the case here as well. And so just to give everybody that broader context, so where this particular incident occurred on the east side, off of Hope Street. Hope Street is a very, very heavily traveled main road, if you will. That area of the city, especially at that time of the year, is very, very busy. There's a lot of shops. There's a lot of stores because it is a residential and business area. It's all mixed. There's everything. There's clubs, there's bars, there's restaurants, there's stores, there's everything that you can imagine, that would surround a big city and a college campus. So that's what made this a little bit unique. And that's why some people didn't quite understand when they're looking at these videos, like, why are there houses all in between and everything? And that's why. So this particular area where this incident occurred is, as I said, is on the edge of the campus. And obviously the thing that caused all the grief at the beginning was the lack of cameras and the fact that the part of the building where the suspect entered and started shooting wasn't recorded. So, that obviously caused a lot of issues because, even when I first heard the story, I think my wife showed me a photo and I joked with her, like, what is that, Bigfoot? Because the photo was just this really weird, grainy black figure. And I was like, you got to be kidding. On the east side of Providence at Brown University in 2025. That's the best you
can come up with. Yeah.
So, but it's just like one of those things, right? Now, I'm not going to give the guy that much credit. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it because he was a PhD student in physics. So I think that tells you a lot about at least his intellectual capacity for sure. But, sometimes it's just dumb luck. And in this particular case, I don't know whether it was one or the other, but the fact remains that what really cracked this case was old school police work and talking to people, and that's the number one thing that I think we can get from this is, even in this day of technology, the ability of investigators to do their job and to get human intelligence is timeless and it never goes out of style.
Yeah. Well, Sean, you mentioned, good old fashioned police work, and we talked about this. I think one of the things that really solved this here, and before I say that, in that news clip we saw, and I want to say, I think it was somebody, may have been the FBI agent in charge of that area, said, we got him,
Right.
Without the help of a homeless person who now is being identified as that second person that they were looking for in that video that they put out, that person had some contact with this now deceased, with the shooter. And so from my understanding, Sean, that person put a post on a social media platform, and that's what led either Providence or the FBI, maybe Providence, to this person. and he was identified as being that person in the still image that Providence released.
Right.
So this guy who was homeless, who said he was sleeping in the basement of that building. And I guess I want to ask you this question. You know, they've got their own police department. Is that common? Does Providence, I know it's a very diverse community, but how do you have a homeless person sleeping on the campus of a university in a basement area?
Well, I think he just blew up his spot, because that's probably not happening anymore.
No. Well, so I'll say this, and I think, Sean, somebody would probably say you're no longer homeless. Either you got this $50,000 reward that the FBI put out, or somebody in the Providence community is going to say, here's a place for you to stay.
Sure.
Because without him, I don't think we would be talking on this Friday about this person was taken into custody.
Right.
So he kind of helped them put some pieces together that helped them go back to look at a lot of the camera footage in the area. And I want to kind of go back to something that I talked to you about the first time I had you on the podcast, was that Providence has a very large number of cameras, like flock cameras, around the city. And those cameras definitely, once they identified a vehicle, kind of talk to us about how they were able to track that vehicle in Providence.
So the way that it started was that they noticed that there was some interaction between the suspect and this homeless guy that they called John.
Uh-huh.
And so once they put that notice out, like, hey, we're looking to talk to John, I think it was less than an hour that he approached an officer over on the east side, or went into one of the command posts, or approached somebody and said, hey, I'm that guy. Was very cooperative and had an interaction with him. And, I thought it was interesting as I was reading it, because obviously you only get bits and pieces. So I'm just kind of, watching this story in my head based on all of my, years of working in that area.
Yeah.
And, I could see someone that, especially, at first I was thinking maybe he's just being territorial, because it seemed like the interaction that they had was he saw the guy acting weird. He saw that he walked over to his car, disarmed the alarm. You could see the lights flash. And then he kind of stopped and turned, walked away, and kept going back and forth. And then every time that he would approach him, it was, I think he described it as like a cat and mouse game, of where the guy would like go one way, he'd go the other, and then start running at one point, to try to get away from him. And, they interacted briefly, but it was because of some of the information that he provided. And he did put out a social media post on Reddit that described the vehicle. And so that,
which I thought was interesting, Sean. Here's a homeless guy who has just because you're homeless doesn't mean you don't have access to the internet. But that was pretty knowledgeable of him to go to Reddit and put that out on social media.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, I don't know if it's because of all the schools in the area or what, but even some of the homeless people there are obviously extremely intelligent. Some of them are geniuses. They're brilliant people that just fell on hard times.
Yeah.
I obviously don't know who this particular gentleman is, but clearly, was very observant, very articulate, and able to get the message across, which was huge. And then they had some other tips. I know there was one from another Brown faculty member or worker that corroborated a lot of the information with a similar, like kind of a weird interaction that they had a couple days before. So as they piece all that together, they were able to run the plate. Plate comes back to the rent-a-car company up in Boston. They cross-reference a bunch of different variables. They wind up finding the date. Sure enough, there's video of the suspect coming in to I think it was an Alamo rental up in Boston. And so, that through just legwork and piecing everything together. So then at that point, obviously, once they put the bolo out, they'll be on the lookout for, then that obviously gets plugged into, all the plate readers and such through NCIC, and at that point, I know that he pinged a couple in Providence there, and then of course, then it really gets weird because then he's up in Boston and Brookline outside of Boston, downtown Boston, winds up shooting and killing an MIT professor up there on Monday night, and then obviously a few days go by. So, but to your point, it wasn't until we got that first piece of information and then having that guy. I'm not saying that we wouldn't have solved the case, especially with the amount of resources that were being brought to bear for this particular case, but it certainly would have taken longer because that broke it wide open. And then when all the pieces lined up and all the pieces, everything was corroborated, especially by other tipsters, that was a huge deal. And then, I mean, we can't really say if he knew that people were onto him. It didn't seem like you would have been able to say that given where the media was at the point. Which is really frustrating for people like us too, because I'm sure you've been in a situation where everybody wants answers right away, and it's like, you can't tell the public everything that's going on while it's going on.
Exactly.
That's not how it works. So to me, I think there was a lot of criticism that was really unfair. I don't think anybody really understands the chaos that is involved when you have 9, 10, 11 federal agencies, 3 state police departments, local police, college police. I mean, that's the most incredible, a pinata of cops that you can put into one barrel all at once. And everybody has their own concerns. Everybody has their own agenda. Everybody has their own issues. So, I think it worked out pretty well, all things considered.
It definitely did, Sean. I want to remind those who are just now tuning into the podcast that tonight's topic, we're talking about freedom versus fear, the open campus debate. And there's a lot of concerns about what happened at Brown University, Sean. About a week prior to the incident at Brown University, there was another shooting at Kentucky State University, where a parent came on campus, confronted 2 students, and he traveled from Indiana. I think there's still some questions about what was his connection to. I think he may have had a son attend that university, but how did a parent drive on campus, confront 2 students, and open fire and kill 1 student and seriously injure another student? And so, there's just a lot of questions about campus safety. And so, we're going to be talking about the open campus debate, like Brown University. It's pretty much, like you said, it's open and wide open. And I've got a video, and this guy is from Providence, and he walks through that area. And I know you're going to recognize a lot of the things. You may even recognize the person in the video. I don't know. But I'm going to show that in a little bit. But I want to kind of go back to something.
Wait. Hold on. Just because I'm from Rhode Island doesn't mean I know everybody from Rhode Island.
Well, Sean, you're a celebrity, man.
I love it.
So yeah, but I think, Sean, there was something I saw earlier today that I think that was on LinkedIn, where I want to say this person is a retired FBI agent, and I think he did an interview with the Fox News outlet, and
Rob Chadwick.
He was kind of he had some concerns. I'm not going to say critical, but there were some things that he raised in his interview about this investigation, and everything is not perfect. And one of the things that I want to say is that we're not trying to Monday morning quarterback. We're not trying to critique what happened, but I think it's just there's some questions that hopefully will be answered. But this next video I want to show, this news clip, there was some tension going on between the local authorities and the FBI. And, and I'll let you speak on, because you've got some information through the officers that you used to work with, on when this first broke, there was a person of interest that was taken into custody, and they had to walk that back. And so I want to, we'll talk about that, but I want to show a little bit of this news clip and kind of talk about just the nuances of what was going on, because you had mentioned so many different agencies trying to work together. And that is something that we always try to do, is to work with other municipal agencies, county agencies, law enforcement partners, but sometimes you got people who may have different agendas that others are kind of sitting there looking like, all right, you need to just go over there and shut up. I realize you got 3 letters in front of you or behind you or whatever, but so let's listen to this here, and then we'll talk about some things on the other side of this here.
Okay.
We are following breaking news out of Rhode Island, where a manhunt is underway for the person suspected of fatally shooting 2 people on the campus of Brown University. Earlier tonight, the FBI released these new images of a person of interest while announcing a $50,000 reward for information that leads to an arrest. It's the latest cleanup effort coming from the very top of the FBI. Sunday morning, FBI Director Kash Patel raced to social media to announce an arrest had been made in connection to the case. Local authorities confirmed they acted on a tip that came directly from the FBI. The only problem? The wrong man was apprehended. Here's how one Brown student, who herself is the survivor of a prior school shooting, described the terrifying negligence.
The second that we found out that the shooter, or the supposed shooter, was in custody, this weight was lifted off everyone's shoulders. And I remember last night I was with friends when we started getting all the alerts that they released him, that they got the wrong guy. And you felt the tension grow in the room, and you felt that weight kind of go back onto people, and people became scared again.
Real mistakes with real consequences. Here with more, Michael Feinberg, MS Now national security and intelligence analyst. He's a former assistant special agent in charge with the FBI and a fellow at Lawfare.
Michael, let's start where Alicia ended, and she's right. Real mistakes have real consequences. If the FBI is now releasing new video and photos about 48 hours later, what does that tell you about where this investigation is? And we welcome your comments about just the posting from the FBI director that then prompted the authorities to give out information that they had not given out.
Yeah, so there's a few things to unpack in those questions. And I'd be remiss if I didn't begin by noting that this is not the first time this has happened with Kash Patel. During the investigation into Charlie Kirk's assassination, he tweeted out information that often directly contradicted past tweets, specifically dealing with the supposed apprehension of the subject. During the raid on John Bolton's house, he was tweeting about the search as it was going on, which directly puts the involved agents' lives in danger if people flock to the scene and decide to take issue. With respect to the plot that was unmasked in Michigan, I think around Halloween, it was reported recently in the Wall Street Journal that his tweeting about that arrest before other nationwide efforts were complete caused other suspects in other regions of the country involved with the case to speed up their plans to leave the United States. So at the most basic level, he is throwing a wrench in the works of the investigative process with every tweet or pronouncement he makes without actually knowing the facts. Now, this has other consequences too. It is incredibly cruel, as we just saw, to the community of Providence, and particularly the students at Brown, who thought for a moment that they were safe, that the problem was contained, and that they did not need to worry anymore. And we've got to note, there are students there for whom this is their second mass shooting. Mm-hmm. That's probably another topic. But lastly, I'd point out that if he's telling people that they have the subject, then other law enforcement agencies, which are not directly involved in this particular manhunt, but are in the surrounding areas, who would probably have their feelers attuned to what was going on and be on the lookout for anything suspicious in neighboring areas, might have let their guard down thinking that there was no longer a problem. And that might have caused us to lose a tip, to not check certain surveillance footage, to not review license plate readers. It could have caused any number of things that should have happened not to.
Michael, help me understand.
You know, Sean, I wanted to play a little bit more of that because I think it goes back to some of the questions that, we'll be talking about. And again, just kind of speak on what your knowledge about the first tip that came in that led Providence to taking into custody that first person of interest.
There was nothing wrong with what happened. The issue was when it was reported that the suspect was in custody. I mean, because whether you call them a suspect or a person of interest, to the average person, just like Mia said, all right, that's the person, right? Whatever title you want to give them, that's the bad guy. And I think that, to I don't know that Michael Feinberg, who he is, but to his point, you're not really supposed to, as any good cop knows, you don't talk about an investigation publicly while it's ongoing.
Especially get on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean I don't know that that's the outlet of record that we want to be using. I mean, I get it, it's 2025, but still, I agree with you. I think if you're going to do that, you have a press conference, whatever. But without getting down, I mean, because I don't know, obviously, Kash Patel, and I don't know what his idea was. I don't know if he was just trying to placate everybody and make them feel safe, and kind of lull them back to a sense of safety, or if it was a little bit of a gold grab of like, hey, it was us that solved the case, that kind of a thing. But either way, it's bad form, and that puts the people on the ground in a really difficult situation, because now you can't even continue, as you saw, you can't even continue focusing on the investigation. Now you have to do damage control on the fact that you basically put it out that you had somebody in custody when you really don't. And that's tough. I mean, I give them credit for doing that and doing it pretty quickly. I always found it interesting as well, as I was looking back to the timeline through my career, being in a capital city, being in a hyper political place. I always noted how certain things, particularly press conferences and things like that, would happen with respect to where they fell in the news cycle. Yeah. Sometimes the bad news gets reported at 10:45 at night, 11:15, when no one's looking. And then, by the morning, there's something new to talk about, and then that fades away, or vice versa, And in this particular case, it's also wildly unfair for that guy, because now the second that his name and image were put out, it went across the world like lightning. And certainly that this is, of all things, they didn't accuse him of parking in the wrong spot. He's being implicated in an awful mass murder, so I could see why that would be an issue. But again, at the end of the day, I'm not commenting on FBI leadership and what they do. But I think, like in any chaotic situation, that's the challenge. The challenge is maintaining good communication, especially across agencies. But the other X factor that it's very difficult to explain to people is what I just simply call the ego factor. It's like, who's gonna take credit for this? Who's gonna be able to stand there and say it's us? Because to me, in a case like this, when an ongoing investigation, to me, I thought that the mayor did a lot more talking than he should have or needed to. I thought, like you're talking to the mayor, talking to the attorney general. The attorney general is the prosecutor. That's the guy you talk to after somebody's arrested. That's who tells you how they're going to have, what he's going to be charged with and all that type of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Obviously, there's a power dynamic going on there. And then when you start throwing in the FBI, I mean, at one point, I know even the president was weighing in. So when that phone starts ringing and you're not just talking to the city council member or the mayor, where you're talking to the head of the FBI or the president of the United States or whomever it is, things get ratcheted up real hot, real fast. And, they do. And now when you're in a room full of people, the other challenges you start running into are, even when things are running smoothly, there's sometimes the information flow isn't always there. And that's assuming that someone isn't trying to hold back a little bit. Maybe they're holding a piece of information. Maybe we're going to run this lead down first and see if it pans out before we, give it to you guys. So that way, if it does pan out, then we take credit for it. And I'm not suggesting that was going on here, but I've seen that happen in previous instances because let's be honest, this is just because it's policing, it's still a career. So people want to get promoted. People want to be in front of the microphone. People want to be in front of the cameras. And, it's sad to say, but some people are interested in using these types of events to, as leverage points for their professional career, which is sad.
Exactly.
But it happens, especially in a high profile case, especially when you have this many competing interests or potentially competing interests all working in the same room.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Sean. I just want to remind those who are tuning in, if you got any comments, put them in the chat. We'll get to your comments. Feel free to jump in and ask some questions and put them in the chat. And like to get those who are tuned in, your comment, your feedback about what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about the freedom versus fear of the open campus debate, and this really surrounds Sean, what took place on the campus of Brown University. And so, you mentioned, you have the FBI director. Yeah, it's 2025. There's the times of social media. You've got the FBI director putting out tweets. You got the president putting out tweets. Now, all of a sudden, you got to walk back those tweets. And one of the things that really struck me, Sean, when this happened, and I got to researching, getting prepared for this topic, was that what is the chance that a student at Brown University has been a victim of another previous mass shooting?
Incredible, right?
Yes. And so the young lady that was on the video news clip that I showed, she's actually from California, and she was involved in a mass school shooting at her high school in California. So she's halfway across the United States in Rhode Island, never thinking something like this here would happen again. And she's not the only student at Providence who has now lived through a second mass shooting coming out of high school, going into college. And so I think those are some things that we in this profession really need to start thinking about. Has somebody went through something like this here traumatic before? And we don't know that. And now we know that. And I think that, again, that's a whole nother topic to talk about, just the trauma of being in high school, experiencing a mass shooting, and now you're in college and you're experiencing another mass shooting. And Sean, I have to say that I think there's a generation of young men and women, they have been through more mass shootings in high school and now in college than any other generation. And that's something that we are really not talking about, is the trauma and how that is impacting young men and women throughout their teenage life, their adult life. It is tragic that these things continue to happen on school campuses. And so, Sean, the one thing that really concerns me is the fact that there were some people who, like I said, rushed to put some information out. Why? We'll never know. We're not going to probably get into that debate, but I think, and the one thing that I noticed, I didn't see, the only person from Brown University who spoke was the president of the university. You didn't see the police chief. And you saw very little. The police chief of Providence spoke some, but the mayor spoke more than the police chief did. And, was it the politics? But to me, the politics should have been taken out, because this was about a mass shooting. And why was the mayor the lead, and why was the attorney general the lead and not the police chief? That's the police chief from Providence and the police chief from Brown University should have been front and center.
The only reason why I wasn't really getting upset about that is because, I was upset for Oscar, the chief. I didn't feel that was respectful to him. But at the end of the day, that's honestly, that's not the main point, and I knew that all the people that were out there investigating this, that was just a sideshow to them. Like, they weren't being distracted by that. They were still out there pounding the pavement. And there are so many other aspects of this that I think people can't even really wrap their head around the enormity of it, right? So when this first occurs, and when they initially, I think the very, very first report that was put out was like 8 people murdered and 20 shot, or something wild, before they even had, I don't even think they had responded, whatever the case might be. And I remember thinking, like, wow, because I had an incident with the circus accident, which is a whole nother story, which turned into an international incident. And I needed 9 rescues that day. And I remember thinking, there's only 5 in the city. So where am I going to get these other 4? And so when I hear numbers like that, even at that point, now you got rescues coming from all over the place. They don't know the city. That's a very tight, there's a lot of one-way streets. You can get all mixed around. So that adds a whole nother level to it. We had police officers from other agencies, all the other surrounding communities coming in to assist, but they don't, again, even, nowadays everybody has, their phone with navigation and stuff, but you still don't know exactly where you're going or what you're doing. And you're in a strange community. Things are different. So there were so many other variables, even to where, I don't know if he's on, and I won't name him, but a very good friend of mine that was there. Actually, he was there from my circus incident as well, but he was there in the immediate aftermath of this. And so there's so many other parts, like, there are students that came outside that don't have shoes on, right? They were in the middle of whatever they were doing. And now it's almost like snowing out practically. So who didn't bring their coat? I have hundreds of kids, young adults, standing outside, some with no shoes, some with no coats, no hats, and now it's shelter in place. So what are we supposed to do? Stand out here for 10 hours and freeze to death? Parents are showing up. There were so many different things happening all at once. The rescues don't know where to go. Who's hurt? Did anybody get transported? Who was in the classroom? Figuring out who's in, who's out. They had to pat everybody down. I mean, and it just goes on and on and on. Even that was the initial response. Then you start adding in, in the immediate aftermath of the investigation. It snows immediately afterward. I mean, what a nightmare. It's covering up evidence. It's now you have plows and people shoveling, potentially sand and salt being used on the roads, and that becoming a factor. So there was it seems like almost every possible variable that could have been working against everybody was. But yet, like I said, that's why I'm extremely proud to be a member of that department, extremely proud of all the amazing work those guys did, because that's always been our secret. Even though we're the big city, and a lot of times, we might have cooler technology or whatever the case might be. That was when I call old school police work, like my father taught me. That's it. It's being able to go get the information and being creative. And I thought they showed a lot of creativity. I thought they showed a lot of adaptability and certainly a lot of perseverance.
Yeah, well, Sean, you said you didn't want to mention his name, but he's on the podcast. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see the comments in the private chat, but he is on the podcast, and he says that you were the sole reason the rescuers got there that day, my friend. That they had to get the elephant out of the way.
All right,
and so yeah, so
I almost feel like I have to tell the story now, but yeah, Bruce is a rock star. He's an amazing guy.
Yeah. And Bruce, for whatever reason, I think you just said you tried to get into the chat, and I think if you're on LinkedIn, it may not let you in, but we can still see your comments in the private chat. So, but yeah, I appreciate your input on that, Bruce. And so, Sean, again, as we're talking about, just the openness of campus, and not just Brown University, but I think Brown just really sticks out because, that campus, I mean, that's, you spent 20 something years there, and the unique challenges that it brings to the community. And I think this is something that obviously they're going to be talking about in the month the months and years to come as to, you know, how can we make these buildings much more harder targets and not soft targets, and how can we enhance and put more cameras up. And I'll say this, and I think one of the things that I know, Sean, and I'm gonna show this video of the university, but you know, there's an old building, there's a new building, and you can speak on that as well. But even if there's an older building, seemed like to me there should have been a lot of thought put into. We need to make sure that we've got eyes in that building, and I'm pretty sure if it hadn't already happened, it's definitely going to happen before anybody goes back into that building. That there's going to be some updated technology in that building.
Yeah.
And so go ahead.
Yeah, that it's a very unique situation because, you know, for those that were tracking the Barris and Holly building where this occurred, they put a new addition on a few years ago. So there's one half of the building that's brand new and there's another half that's really old. And so that's why they don't have video of the shooter walking in, because he came in through the old part of the building and that entrance doesn't have any cameras on it. I will tell you this from my own personal experience. Every time that I encountered their university and just the people in that immediate area, extremely liberal when it comes to, you know, like they don't want the cameras. I mean, we used to fight with them all the time, even traffic cameras, all types of stuff, you know, obviously using safety and then events like this as a justification, and they were very much against it. Got the ACLU involved.
Oh wow.
And so there's been a lot of pushback on these things, and I think that's the struggle, right? Is how do you balance protection and privacy?
Yeah.
And you know, where do you draw the line? Because you know, the as we all know, the challenge is, right, we could make it very, very secure, but who wants to live in a maximum security prison? But on the other hand, you know, when you leave it wide open, things like this happen. And I won't go down a rabbit hole on you, but from what I understand, the door was like propped open here, which is a raw nerve for me. You know, I was in Texas immediately after Uvalde happened. I was very close to there and talked to some guys that were actually at that scene.
Yeah.
And, you know, so it's not to say that there may not have been some other type of tragedy that day, but it's hard to look back at those things and say, what if, you know, how would it have been different? And I think that's what we're going to see is we're going to see a lot more pushback and maybe a lot less resistance when it comes to instituting some of these more hardened security techniques and procedures.
Yeah. So Sean, one of the things that once, you know, Nat's out who this suspect was, he had a connection to the university. He attended the university. He had a connection to the professor that he murdered in Boston. One of the things that I have noticed over the last couple of years with all these mass shootings is that these individuals have a connection to the school. You know, like up in Minnesota, there was a mass shooting at a Catholic church several months ago. Annunciation was the name of the school there. The person who committed that crime was a former student at that Annunciation church. His mother worked at that church. If you go back to the mass shooting in Sandy Hook, I believe that shooter had a connection to the school.
Yeah, his mom worked there.
His mom worked there. The student
and I think I think he had attended the school as well.
Yeah, he had attended the school. Yeah, exactly. And so then you go to Uvalde. He had attended that elementary school. He lived in that neighborhood. So we're talking about people who have either they've been former students or they've worked at a school. Mainly, they've been former students, and they come back, so they know the area, they know the layout of the school. And so here information is now coming out that he knew that part of the building, even though I think he had kind of disassociated himself with the university in 2003. Nothing had really probably changed since 2003 with that building.
No.
Yeah.
No, he enrolled in 2001. He was there for, I don't know if he finished his year or if they said that he enrolled in September of 2000. He left in April 2001, and then he formally withdrew in 2003. But what was interesting was when he applied for his visa in 2017, he used the Brown University address on his application. So, because I thought, what's the connection? There was nothing obvious.
Yeah.
But the fact that almost 20 years later, he's using that address, obviously it was still on his mind. So, we can only guess that obviously he didn't finish what he had started with his PhD. So maybe he had misgivings toward the school because of a professor, or, there was some type of a connection. I mean, obviously there are still a lot of questions that nobody has answers to, because it doesn't make sense. And that's the part that I think a lot of people have trouble wrapping their head around, as we know as cops, is unfortunately there are times that things just don't make sense, that people just do crazy stuff. It's called crazy for a reason.
And this didn't make sense, Sean. What was the connection? After the first person of interest was no longer a person of interest, what was the connection that led this person to that university? And you always kind of think there has to be a connection. And then the second thing came out, and you and I spoke about this, the Boston, the professor who was killed in Boston. Is there some kind of connection there? And you really didn't know, and now you know that he had a connection with that professor. They were attended the same college in Portugal?
Portugal, right? Yep.
And so again, these mass shootings, individuals who commit these mass shootings have a very good sense of the area, have a very good sense of the people. And so you can have people who are profile people, that's what they study, that's what they do. FBI people profile people. You don't always get it right. And so I don't see how anybody could have profiled this person to turn out to be the suspect in this shooting. And so Bruce puts in the chat, he said it's called the Pathway to Intended Violence, a 6-stage process that starts with grievance to research,
ideation
to research, planning to preparation, to probing, breaching, to attack. I was talking to Sean about this last night. He said he teaches this for DHS.
Like I said, he's a rock star.
Yeah. So Bruce, appreciate that. And so again, you got somebody who is really thinking about a lot of things, and a lot of people, Sean, and to those who are listening, they leave these manifestos. They write out everything that's kind of going through their mind. And just like with the shooting that took place up here in Minnesota at this church at Annunciation, that person left a very detailed manifesto as to what was going on in his mind. And so again, I think you can never predict these things, but you find out a lot after the facts.
Yeah, sure.
When they happen.
There'll be a ton.
Yeah. And so, Sean, I want to play a little bit of this here clip about this person who is from Providence. I know you don't know him, but
maybe I do. Let's see.
Yeah, but I want to show this because I think it gives the audience, and I know you and those who are from Providence, they know this area. But for somebody like me and others who don't, this gives a very up close view of what you all walk through every day when you were at the Providence Police Department.
Hey guys, a lot of you have been DMing me and messaging me about the Brown University shooting. Unfortunately, I live very close to it, and a lot of you were asking about the specifics of the layout of where this all took place and why they're struggling so much to locate and identify, at least from what we know, one suspect. So I felt like it'd be good to come out here and kind of give you guys a layout of what we're dealing with and what the community actually looks like, because I think a lot of people, especially the ones who've been messaging me, what they believe it is around here, like all university kind of college campus, that's not really what it is. Where Boris and Holly is located, and if we spin around real quick, you can see it right here. This is actually behind this brick building here. That tall building right there is the Boris and Holly building. And so that's what we're dealing with. And we're gonna take a walk down Hope Street, which is the street that we just showed you. And I'm gonna show you where that first camera footage is from. But if you look behind me, and you can see here, they've already been kind of canvassing this area. You got crime scene tape in the trees still, but this is an affluent community and there's a lot of residential buildings around here. And the problem is a lot of the people that own these buildings or live in these buildings, they're not even here. A lot of them travel to Florida for the winter months because it's too cold up here. So one of the barriers they're dealing with right now is trying to locate the people that own these properties to get access to their cameras, whether they're physical cameras or if they're cloud-based like a Ring or Simply Safe. They have to get their consent before they can go to those providers and get access to that camera footage. And that's why days later, we're still getting more camera footage. In fact, just before coming out here, they released new camera footage of a second person. They're not calling him a suspect. They're just saying there's someone that they want to identify and speak with. What I found interesting about this new footage of this new person is if we look at all the footage of the person of interest, the person that they've been showing us since day one, in some videos, that person has a backpack, right? A satchel, if you will. And you can see camera footage with them having it on and then footage with them having it off. The question is, where did that backpack / satchel go? And what's interesting about this new footage of this different person, it's clearly a different person. They have a backpack / satchel in that video footage. Is it the same bag? Is it a different bag? I don't know. The video's too blurry to figure that out. But it is an interesting question because we're all looking for one person, but you have to consider the fact that there may be more than one person. We're gonna walk around a little bit. I wanna be respectful to the investigation. There's a lot of media out here right now, and I don't wanna be out here too long. I think it's a fine line between giving you guys access to what's going on out here and being disrespectful to not only the community, but investigators actually working the case. So we're not gonna stay out here long. I'm not gonna go to places I shouldn't be going. I'm just gonna give you an overview of what it looks like here so you have a better understanding of what we're dealing with on the ground. All right, so you can see over here, you got fire out here. That's obviously just for like food, drinks for investigators, everyone who's on scene. You got a ton of media out here right now as well. Okay, the street that we're on right now is Hope Street. And where we're walking to, if you look ahead, the corner right here is Hope and Waterman. And when we get up there, that's the actual first video that everyone saw of the person of interest, where basically that's the first video we have of the suspect leaving the area. All right, so over here real quick, that's the Boris and Holly building. This is the north side of the building. And what investigators have said so far is that they believe the shooter came out of this side of the building and they exited by, if we come over here real quick, they exited by those dumpsters over there, okay? Yeah, it looks like the suspect would have ran right through here. So the back of the building's right here, and then he would have taken a right onto this road. This is Hope, and then we pick up with the first video of him making that turn. So the problem is, Boris and Holly, from what we've learned, it's essentially two buildings. There's an older portion, and there's a newer portion of the building. The newer portion, see what's happening here. That's Cranston and Providence. That could be something, or it could be just that Cranston's offering mutual aid to Providence Police because they're inundated with this investigation and they're short-staffed. That's another Cranston cop. That could be something. If it is, I'll let you guys know. So we were talking about the building, right? Boris and Holly, they did a lot of construction there about 5 years ago.
You know, Sean, I know you know that area very well. And the reason I wanted to play that, it probably played a little bit, I wanted to play a little bit more of it, was because you had mentioned the mutual aid that Providence is receiving. And he mentioned another, obviously a suburb agency that is assisting and responding to calls there in Providence. And one of the things that, you know, we talked about earlier was that when, you know, this person of interest was saying, hey, we've got this person in the custody, and everybody kind of dropped their guard. Maybe, you know, we don't need to look at certain things. And even the former FBI agent mentioned that in when he was speaking. But you know, you had other agencies around, and everybody is like, "Hey, we got to find this guy." And here in that clip, you saw other agencies responding to assist Providence on whatever kind of call they were responding to. But that gave me a very up close look at how that campus is situated in Providence. And as you say, you walk off the campus, and you're in a very affluent neighborhood.
It's easier to think of it the other way around. It's a neighborhood that has college buildings drop into it, because that's really what it is.
Uh-huh.
And you know, and don't forget now, east side of Providence, it was founded by Roger Williams in the 1600s. So you know, there are houses that are inches apart because of the construction. There are roads that are barely passable because again, these houses were built 300-400 years ago, some of them that have been kept up. So you know, things are different there. And another part too that I keep reminding myself of, I learned this traveling the country, that I realized that Rhode Island is a lot different in many ways, because a couple things. First of all, we don't use the county system like almost everywhere else does. And one of the byproducts of that is we don't overlap. And what I mean by that is the Rhode Island State Police, they handle the highways and a couple of really rural communities that have very tiny, small departments, or they have like, you know, reserve guys on at night or whatever. And then the city cops handle the city. So everybody kind of has their own thing. We don't really get together. And as much as some might say there's egos, of course there always is in this business. But for the most part, in my experience, we always work very well together. The issue is we're not used to having to work together very often. You know, and when I travel the country, I talk to officers from, especially in the Midwest, the South, a lot of those guys, Texas, Louisiana, Ohio. It's, you know, they're all the time. It'll be a local cop with a state cop, with a county cop, with a sheriff, with this, right? So they intertwine. Like, we don't do that. So when, which is also a testament to the other departments, because I'm sure those departments have staffing minimums. So that means they're paying overtime. Communities that have nothing to do with this, you know, are sending their guys and girls to come and assist. I mean, we were even bringing retired people back. I was talking to a couple. So it was an all hands on deck situation. And I certainly appreciate that. But again, it certainly lends to the complexity though, because there's 38 different communities in Rhode Island. If I have guys from every department, you know, what channel are you on? Who's got what gear? Like who, you know what I mean? Like you get an officer that's in some of these really, really rural areas. They've never even been in the city, you know, never mind. Like, what do I do if a bad guy pops out of an alley or something? You know? So, and I'm just having fun, but that was a big deal to have all that. But again, you know, I'm just trying to make the point that when people are sitting there, you know, lobbing bombs at these guys, and not that it's not warranted in certain situations, if they had any idea the enormity of what is happening behind the scenes and the amount of coordination and the level of communication and the frustration of having staggered communications, things that happened an hour ago are just getting to you. And maybe it's not the right message. Maybe half of it got lost. So, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I think that's a part that when I say I think this was a great success, that's what I mean, because it's always going to be ugly. It's always going to be messy.
You're right.
It's never going to be neat and clean. So what determines rather whether it was a success or not is how it ends. And not that anyone dying is the intent, but once the crime occurred, we just want to either bring that person to justice, or in this particular case, he decided to bring it to himself.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Sean, I want to remind those who are just now tuning into the podcast that tonight's topic is freedom versus fear, the open campus debate. And you know, Sean, and to those who are listening, that there's going to be a debate about, you know, open campuses, university campuses, and even campuses that are a little bit more confined. How, you know, like what happened in Kentucky that I mentioned earlier, how did this parent was able to get on the campus with a firearm, confront two students, and shoot and kill one and injure another? How did that happen? And what can universities do to and not make it feel like you're going through TSA, but at the same time, make students feel safe. Because, and I think one of the things that's going to come out of this, and I could be wrong, Sean, is that you got to think about the students that are on campus. Were they involved in another mass shooting in high school? And they're bringing that trauma to the campus, and now all of a sudden here's another mass shooting that they have to live through. And you have to wonder, like this young lady, you know, will she be able to go back to Brown University?
Right.
And will others be able to go back to Brown University because of just the fear? Because again, nobody would ever have thought, Sean, that this guy who was a former Brown student back in what 2000
2001, yeah.
Here it is 25 years later, and he's on campus committing another horrible mass shooting. And so, you know, that is something that those on university campuses are going to be talking with their law enforcement partners, their own campus police department partners, talking with local police departments to say, you know, what can we do to ensure that we are providing a good, safe campus? And you can have all the safeguards in place, Sean, as you know, things are still going to happen. But I think, you know, a lot of questions are going to be raised as to, you know, why wasn't there cameras in an old building? I mean, you know, again, there's going to be a lot of whys, and people will probably say, well, we need to get past the why. Well, for Sean, for a student who's lived through a second mass shooting, that's kind of hard to get past that.
Yeah, that's like getting struck by lightning twice. I remember seeing the story of a guy from Japan who would survive both atomic bombs, and I don't know which is more amazing. But I think at this stage of the game, the thing that will be in the immediate focus, I would imagine, is the recovery. You know, because I'll tell you what, this had a very wide-ranging effect. This is a very large, because everyone's always thinking about the kids in the classroom. There were hundreds of kids throughout the building. There were thousands of kids in the immediate area that didn't have any idea what was going on, that just got a text that says active shooter, lock yourself in your room, turn your lights off, and don't, you know, turn your phone off, whatever. That's for a lot of kids, that's terrifying. And nobody knew. They hear noises. Is that the bad guy? Is that the police? You know, I mean, I had family that works there that they were in the building, you know, like peeing in buckets because they were afraid of coming out of the room and not knowing what was going on. And so, you know, just going back to work, going back to school. And, you know, I feel compelled to talk about this, even if it's for a second. The other issue is nobody talks about this, the effect it has on the police officers.
Yeah.
You know, like I talked to the guys that were the very first ones in that room, and, you know, they have college age kids, and now they see these college kids, innocent victims murdered. That affects you. That has an impact on you. All the people screaming, yelling, even as weird as it sounds, they like patting these kids down, like they're terrorized victims, but you don't know who's who. So all of those things, are really important. And, you know, like I made a bunch of calls to guys that I knew were there, and you know, some of them would start talking, and I would say, hey, you don't have to relive it for me. I mean, if you want to talk about it, that's great. I would share some of my experiences just so that they understood that I wasn't judging, you know, when I've been there. But and I would say, I'm just calling to check on you, just calling to make sure you're okay, you know. And if you need to talk to somebody, especially now that I'm not there, you know, it's much easier to talk to a retired guy who lives in the Caribbean. And I think it's just a lot of people were touched by that. And because I've been there, and I know sometimes you start to, in the aftermath, it can be really unnerving, because now that the adrenaline dump is worn off, the investigation for you is over, and now you're having to come to terms with, you know, the psychological impact of this. And I think that, you know, there's been a lot of focus on that for the survivors, and rightfully so. But I think there should be equal attention on that for the people that were involved on the law enforcement side as well.
Well, you know, Sean, it's good you brought that out, because that was something that I wanted to bring up as well, because I wanted to kind of show this other clip, but it has to show more of what happened in the beginning. But it shows the officers that you work with coming into a classroom, telling all the students to get their hands up and going through that. And so, and this is probably, and Sean, you'll probably know this. This is probably a first time for some of them to respond to such a mass shooting.
Oh yeah, and
yeah.
And you know, Brown University is not a violent place by any stretch, which was what made this. I mean, not that it wouldn't be shocking anywhere, but it was extra because that's just not the environment that
Brown
was there. Yeah, in that area. So yeah, this is a big deal. And you know, some of them, a lot of them are international students. They're from Asia, they're from the Middle East, they're from, you know, a lot of them not English speaking countries. So this could be really a much different and more terrifying experience, even more so for them. And, you know, but my point is for the police, right? Because they don't even know who the bad guy is. And I know I had cases in my career where the bad guy pretended to be one of the victims, you know? And so now you're like, if I turn my back on this person, you know, is something else going to happen? Or, you know, so, I mean, there's so many things going through everybody's mind. Not to mention the frustration of, okay, what you may not have noticed in some of those videos is that, I mean, I could see that they couldn't get into the door, you know? So like, who's got a key, like all these things, right? I mean, and that became like a really important point now that we're talking about it with Uvalde as well, right? Because that was the whole linchpin, is how do we get in the room? Same thing here. So it's like, well, what do we do? You know, as they're clearing a hallway, we got to keep going. We can't stop now, you know, and then, okay, do you remember which room it was that was locked? You know, all those types of things. Again, this is just layer on top of layer on top of layer for the people that were on scene and trying to manage this from the beginning. You know, my hat's off to them.
Yeah. Well, Sean, you know, and as we talk about the freedom, you know, the freedom of having an open campus and now the fear of having an open campus, I think, again, it's going to create a much open debate with students on these campuses because it continues to happen. And, you know, I've got something I want to kind of pull up. Let me see. There's a comment in the chat from Bruce. He says that was an issue at the Reunification Center. Also, I called an Uber for a kid that ran out of the building without shoes. So, you know, you know, Bruce's boots on the ground. He's there. And, you know, you know, you're calling Uber for a student, and now you got a student without no shoes on, you know, and so.
Well, that was just the beginning. He had like he was the one. He has all these hundreds of kids. You know, some of them are wandering off. Some of them are you know, they're calling their parents. Some are catatonic and can't move. Who doesn't have clothes? This particular girl didn't have shoes on. He was like, "What are we supposed to do?" Like, you know, and he's corralling everybody. As all different agencies are showing up, you know, he was describing to me the scene of like, you know, he had to secure the scene. So it's like, don't let everybody leave because they're witnesses or victims or whatever. So but what are we going to do? Like, am I going to fight with them? And now what do I tell this girl? And he's got hundreds of people, you know, like a lot of these other security guards, they're not armed. So what if the bad guy, you know, shows up again? Now what do we do? You know, there was so many different levels to this. It was wild.
Yeah, well, you know, and Bruce is mentioning, you know, he's referencing to the international students, you know, who some don't even speak English, or if they, I mean, there is a terrifying moment that these young men and women had to experience, and now commands are being shouted to them about hands up. You know, they may not even understand what that officer is saying, but they're just going along with whatever they're following the crowd. And, you know, Bruce mentions that, you know, kids didn't even want to leave the center due to fear today, you know. And so, again, I just think there's just going to be so much conversation and debate about this open campus and how can we make it much more safer. And he says, you know, sorry that he was referencing to the international kids. There is no way higher ed is going to surround their campus with walls. Yeah, I mean, you're right, Bruce. I mean, there's, you know, financially, it's just not possible. You're going to have a lot of pushback from that. But I think the one thing that I have said to people, Sean, is that when people talk about, man, we don't need to have this, we don't need to have that. And I say, well, what do you do when you fly? I mean, you got to go through through TSA. You got to go through all of these checkpoints. You got to go through all these security things, and unless you're just not going to fly. So if we're going to make sure that we're getting on a plane safe, we need to make sure that students are walking into these schools safe. And if that means putting in, metal detectors that detect firearms or things that typically are not seen in schools, it's just going to make these universities and high schools much more safer. And you mentioned something, Sean, that happens a lot: propping doors open. That was the thing with Uvalde. And I think that teacher who did that took a lot of criticism, and we covered that a lot when that happened. And I don't think it turned out the way that it was portrayed in the news media. And so, Bruce goes on to say that he was a part of a team that did safety assessments at all public universities in the state of Louisiana. And without exceptions, the president of the university want their campus open. So, again, if it's the history of a university, hey, you don't want to take away that historical knowledge or the feeling of that campus. But I think at some point, these college presidents and boards, regents are going to really have to take and really bring in law enforcement, Sean. And Bruce obviously has a very good background in safety and going to college campuses. But I think when you bring in law enforcement to say, okay, what do you think we need to do without compromising the university feeling to make it much more safer to prevent these things from happening?
And like we say, that's the balance. The balance. I mean, one of the big attractions to the Brown University campus is the fact that it's embedded in the community.
Yeah.
That you can come out of your dorm that looks like an apartment house, and you can go to the taco shop, or you can go to the Starbucks, or you can go to whatever, and the bookstore is a block over there. And like, people like that. They like feeling like they live in the neighborhood, they live in the community. And that's why we say it's a tricky subject, because all right, we could lock the school down like TSA, and now what? Every single time you go in the building, it's you gotta have a card. College kids, right? Like, who forgot their card?
Yeah.
So there's always going to be, there's always going to be the workaround. There's always going to be the what if. But I think, I think what makes this one interesting is it doesn't appear that there were any obvious signs.
Yeah.
Like he, from what I understand, he was never arrested the entire time he lived in the United States. Wasn't a criminal. So what made him do something like this? And then double down and go to Boston, and then make that, and murder that other professor is really bizarre. And as much as there's a connection of him going to college, I mean, I don't know that going to school with somebody 30 years ago is a hot button, like that wouldn't be a real red flag for me if I was investigating. But obviously there must be more. I'm sure things will show up as they search that storage unit, and I'm sure go to his apartment or whatever, that if he had social media, I'm sure something will come up as they're doing their investigation. To connect those dots.
Yeah, and exactly with all these mass shootings, once a person takes their own life, you find out that what they were on the internet searching and find out more information. Bruce puts in the chat that campus police, obviously they're telling, the people that need to hear these things, but they're just not hearing it, and they're not changing anything. And he goes on to say that there's balance in between low risk and high impact. And he mentions it's kind of like rolling the dice, but I think, we've got to get away from, that mindset of, well, it hasn't happened. It won't happen. This is a good example of it happened at Brown University. And Brown University is very well known for some of the most educated people in the world because of their, there may be, I don't know, engineers or whatever it may be. You've got some very intelligent, smart people who go to Brown. And not saying that, like the college, Texas Tech University in Lubbock is not a smart university, or the University of Oklahoma is not smart.
Much better football teams too.
Much better football team. Exactly. And we got a good game coming on tonight. So
I know we do.
Yeah. And so, but yeah, I think, Sean, even this is a wake up call
for sure
for university presidents and boards of regents and whatever that university is made up of, is to stop and say, okay, if this happened at Brown, it can happen at the next university over. It can.
One of the conversations that was going on in the background, which most people didn't catch, is Rhode Island School of Design, or we call it RISD for short, is a really prestigious art-based school. They're almost intertwined on the same campus as Brown. So they have a whole nother set of concerns, because when they were putting out the alerts, they weren't necessarily coordinated with Brown. So they were asking Brown, like, hey, let's get together so that we can do this together.
Yeah.
Because, we're all mixed in the same geographical location. So if you have an active shooter, we need to know that, and vice versa, So to your point, that's the part that I hope comes of this, because obviously we can't undo what's been done. The real magic at this point is learning from whatever happened and fixing those things so that, we make things better to either prevent it or mitigate it in the future.
Yeah. Well, Sean, as always, we kind of went over time a little bit, but this is a great conversation to have, especially after the tragic incident that happened at Brown University, and also what happened that didn't happen on the campus, but happened up in Boston with the professor there. And, Sean, I think, after the holidays and after more information comes out, I would like to get back together to have a much more another conversation about this debate of open campuses, how universities could make the campuses, they are safe. But as we've seen at so many different universities that do have walls around, things do happen. And we're talking about a generation of young men and women who they've lived through mass shooting drill trainings in elementary, junior high, high school, and now here they are in higher ed, and they're still dealing with these type of tragic incidents. So I would love to invite you to come back on to talk about that, and also to get your other esteemed colleagues their input. Bruce brings brings so much knowledge to it, and again, this is a great conversation to have. And so, Sean, as always, it's been great. But you've got a book that's coming out, and it's already out. Let's talk about that real quick.
Just came out, AIO Leadership for Law Enforcement, and that the way it's structured, and we talked about it very briefly the last few times, is the 11, what I call the 11 fatal flaws of leadership. And in the book, I for each of those 11 fatal flaws, it's its own chapter, and I have a failure story of very well-known stories of law enforcement where things didn't go the way they were supposed to and why, and then a success story. And this one is very similar. The one that happened at Brown here with this scenario is very similar to, I talk about Uvalde in there. I talk about Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida, a few other incidents that people would recognize, because I think it's important for people to not just hear these things as concepts, it's to be able to see them in action and understand them. And the best part is, even though it's obviously that's my background and I wrote it for police officers, or law enforcement, first responders, it applies to all aspects of life, because as the AIO reference mentions, that's my phrase for adapt, improvise, and overcome. And it's a 3-step process that I talk about in the book, and a framework for anybody that's very simple and easy to get through any problem. But in this particular case, we're talking about crisis leadership, which in this line of work, it to me was the most valuable thing, because you can be a great boss when things are calm. But to me, where you really earn your bones is when the bullets are flying and people are dying. That's when everybody's really looking to you. So, you need to be able to show up. So that's what the book is all about. People can get it on the website. It's aioleadership.com/book. And we've actually added a free bonus mini course. It's a week-long course to add on. It's very quick. It's only a few minutes a day, but it gives some people some very actionable things to really help improve their leadership skills, and some other surprises in there too.
Yeah. Well, Bruce, I know he promised you an autographed copy. And I know you'll get your autographed copy before I get mine. So I'm in a long line of people who are waiting to get that autographed copy. But Bruce, I agree. I wish more people were on tonight watching and having an input on this very important topic, as we talked about. The freedom of open campus. Now, the fear. Freedom versus fear of the open campus debate. And we're going to continue this debate definitely after we learn more about the shooter. And because I'm pretty sure he left some kind of digital footprint of what he was doing up to, this incident happening. And so,
Sure.
So Sean, again, I appreciate it, and appreciate, you putting this information out and to those who follow you, and Bruce just mentioned that that you called back to Providence to check on people mentally, and that just shows your true leadership skills. Even though you've retired as a lieutenant, you're still checking on your people to make sure that they're okay.
Those are my guys and girls. That's still my family, just because I'm not working there anymore. And if anything, in a lot of ways, because I left there as a lieutenant and a commanding officer, like I was in charge of a lot of them, and I felt responsible, like as a father figure in a way. So, and again, I've been through so many critical incidents myself. I know how that feels, and I know how it works. And there were times that I was like, and it's sad that even through my career, when I would call guys, even with incidents that I wasn't involved with, and I would say, hey, just checking on you. And they would say, you know what, you're the only one that's called me to do that.
Yeah.
Or at that point, and it's just because I understand how that works. And I know that that you reach a point, and I'm sure you've been there too, where it's like the adrenaline dump is over and hey, what about me? Like it's hard to just go back to normal and pretend like you didn't see the things that you saw or heard or experienced. So hopefully we can make things better.
Yeah. Well, Sean, and I'll leave this as we get ready to end the podcast, is that this event that took place at Brown University has definitely impacted the men and women at Providence Police Department, the men and women at Brown University, as well as the whole community at large. And so, I definitely want to come back and have a much more deeper conversation about what took place on Brown at the campus at Brown University, and how the community of Providence is healing, and how much of an input will the community have, because they were also impacted,
Oh, sure.
By this event.
And I think another great thing too is by the next time we talk, we'll actually have an opportunity to see how Brown University responds after the students come back from Christmas break, and any updates or any changes. So, and the conversations that are being had. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Sean, as always, appreciate you, sir. Thank you, and wishing you and your family a good Christmas holiday season, a good New Year's, and I'm going to take a break, a 2-week break. We're not going to be on next Thursday, and the following Thursday is New Year's. So we're going to be back with 2026 of You and the Law podcast, and much more greater conversations that we're going to be having in the coming year. And I hope that you will be a part of those conversations as we look to bring in 2026 on You and the Law podcast.
Amen. And before we get off, I do, Bruce points out, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my friend Mike Wheeler. He's head of the peer support unit, and he's actually still very actively involved as a retired guide. He has been a trailblazer for a lot of that stuff there. So shout out to him and the rest of his team as well.
Great. All right. Well, Sean, again, I can't thank you enough. And Bruce, and to all those Miguel, who are on listening, again, thank you all for tuning in. And if you have not told anybody about this great podcast, please tell everybody that to go to our YouTube page. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe. Just go subscribe and listen to some of the other podcast shows that we've done, and follow us on Facebook as well. But definitely go to our YouTube and subscribe You and the Law podcast. But again, Sean, thank you, and it's been a pleasure. And
As
everybody,
always.
have a safe Christmas and definitely a safe New Year. And we will see everybody back on You and the Law podcast in 2026. So everybody have a good night, and thank you for tuning in.
Thank you. And shout out to my man, Miguel. Hang in there, brother. Stay strong.
All right.
Appreciate you. Merry Christmas, Chief.
That's a wrap on this episode of You and the Law podcast. We've got more eye-opening conversations and hard-hitting insights coming your way, so make sure you subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcast, and stay ready because the next episode might just change the way you see law enforcement forever.